If you ever touch that Axe-50, you're done with this team. Commander Jack Harlow didn't shout. He didn't need to. The words landed like a sniper's round cold. Precise. Impossible to ignore. And in the dust-bitten yards of Fort Sentinel. That warning drew a line no medic was supposed to cross. But warnings mean little once the battlefield decides. And when Red Dagger Gorge would later erupt in fire, when their lead marksman went silent and chaos carved through the SEAL convoy, the only figure near the long-barreled predator was Lieutenant Claire Rains, a combat medic no one trusted with a weapon. One breath, one choice, and every rule would break. Back then, the Axe-50 NATO sniper rifle rested under coarse camouflage beside stacked crates. A weapon built to tear through engines from nearly a kilometer away. To Claire, it wasn't just steel, it was a memory. A scar on her left wrist glimmered in the sun, a reminder of childhood drills with her father, Daniel Rains, once a SOCOM recon sniper, who used to whisper, "The wind isn't your enemy. Fear is." Claire was the outsider in Harlow's team. They called her Doc, offered polite smiles, but dismissed every suggestion. A healer, not a warrior, just a medic with rolled sleeves and neat boots. What no one saw were the quiet nights her bent over a notebook filled with ballistic formulas, her hand steadying on a salvaged scope fixed to her windowsill, practicing aim on nothing but empty desert horizon. That morning at Outpost Raven 7, the Nevada heat clawed across the sand. Radios cracked, helicopters thumped, Marines laughed wearily amid the blur. No one noticed Claire's gaze linger on the rifle. It was the gaze of someone who knew exactly what it could do. She crouched, not to lift it, but to let her fingers graze the coarse cloth covering the barrel, a touch no one else saw. And in that brief contact, her father's voice returned. "Some things aren't meant for you, not until the world runs out of people sane enough to hold them." Her hand hovered there, steady, calm, almost human. She hadn't crossed the line. Not yet. But inside. Something shifted. For 4 years she had stitched arteries and patched holes. In that instant, she understood maybe she was the only one who could stop the bleeding before it began. Then smoke twisted above Red Dagger Gorge. The first explosion tore the air. Recon feed jammed. Convoy trucks stalled in the choke. Soldiers scattered. Harlow reached for comms too late. Claire crouched beside the AX-50. No one called her name. No orders came. And for the first time in her life, she didn't wait for permission. She racked the bolt. The sound snapped louder than the chaos itself. What happened next wouldn't just rewrite her future. It would decide whether the SEALs walked out of Red Dagger Gorge alive. Some soldiers joined to prove their toughness. Claire Rains joined because someone had to keep others breathing when the fight ended. That was the version everyone accepted, and why no one expected her to rise far. She'd grown up on the frayed edge of Fort Sentinel's shadow, in a trailer with broken air conditioning but always cold water, thanks to her father's stubborn freezer repairs. Daniel Rains, whispered in SOCOM circles, never bragged about missions. He only taught his daughter simple truths, how to walk across sand without leaving tracks, how to catch a glint in glass, how to trust silence between heartbeats. When an accident at a training range stole him away an explosion, a folded flag, and silence, Claire abandoned dreams of combat and buried herself in medicine. Her mother, a quiet library clerk, asked one promise, don't follow one death with another gun. For years, Claire wore the Red Cross armband, convincing herself healing was enough. But even as she dressed wounds, she could not quiet her father's last lesson. You have the eyes of someone who knows when to end something bad. Don't ever let them teach you to bow to it. At Fort Sentinel, SEALs treated her like the little sister they had no time for. When she suggested desert-proofing medical kits, Harlow waved her off when she asked to observe the rifle team. Marines laughed. "Doc, you're not Rambo." The joke became that if Claire ever touched an AX-50, she'd probably try to sterilize it. Everyone chuckled, except her, because when the barracks went dark, she trained alone. She stripped medical kits like rifles, sketched sight lines in her notebook, and adjusted her salvaged scope on the sill each dawn. Not searching for enemies, searching for the version of herself she swore she'd buried. Under her bunk, she kept a small wooden box, its surface worn smooth. Inside lay 3 things: a notebook filled with wind formulas, her father's torn sniper glove, and a faded photograph of him cleaning an M24 beneath an oak tree. To others, they'd be relics. To her, they were a tether, one she both feared and needed. On nights when the Nevada winds howled like distant gunfire, she swore she could still hear him whisper, "No one shoots better than someone unafraid of silence." And though she clung to medicine, her pulse slowed whenever her mind drifted to a trigger not from hunger for violence, but from an unspoken readiness she could never erase. So when the recon channel cracked with static at Red Dagger Gorge, and the first plumes of smoke coiled above the cliffs, Claire didn't freeze like the others. The medic in her longed to sprint toward the wounded. But something older pulled her instead toward the ridgeline, toward the AX-50 NATO lying in the dust. The desert had chosen its test, and the medic no one trusted with a rifle was about to decide if anyone would survive the gorge. Once, when a young Marine at Fort Sentinel spotted the faded photograph in her notebook, Claire Rains only smiled and said, "Just someone who taught me to look a little farther." No one pressed her. No one imagined how far her eyes could truly see. But on the day the SEAL convoy pushed into the jagged veins of Red Dagger Gorge, every rule she had lived by was about to break. On the map, it looked harmless, just a routine supply corridor, sketched in neat blue ink. But the Nevada desert is never neat. The gorge devoured signals, warped sound, and turned safe routes into coffins. 90 seconds before the first blast, the recon UAV went dark. Then came the explosion, violent enough to rattle bone and strip silence raw. Gunfire poured from unseen cliffs, invisible shooters, hidden angles, bullets tearing through sand and steel alike. The team fractured instantly. Primary snipers were down or trapped. Vehicles ground to a halt in the choke point, and the only weapon capable of shifting the tide, the AX-50 NATO sniper rifle, lay abandoned near the wreck of the UAV. At the field station behind the line, Claire's hands were slick with blood that wasn't hers. One soldier clutched his throat, another convulsed with shrapnel deep in his side. Her earpiece screeched with static. Then one desperate cry, "We can't see the targets, they're moving on the ridge." Claire turned west. Her medic's eyes read the terrain monitor like a chart, the blind curve, the narrow pass, the killing lane waiting for someone bold enough to claim it. Her father's words surfaced again. A person who runs from chaos is a victim. A person who steps into chaos to end it is a warrior. She didn't wait. No one called her name. No orders came. Claire cinched her boots tighter, wiped her face with a bloody sleeve, and ran. In her med bag, she carried no syringes this time, only a torn glove and the salvaged scope she had hidden for years. The gorge fought her with every step. Sand blistered her palms. Rocks drew blood across her knuckles. But she climbed anyway, dragging herself toward the ridge as if the valley itself were testing her worth. Then she saw it, the AX-50 lying in dust and brass, heavy and waiting, ownerless, but not soulless. Claire slid on her father's glove, The fabric was frayed, but it fit as though it had been waiting. She mounted the scope on a crude wooden brace left behind by retreating hands, her motions instinctive, efficient, clean. Through the glass, the world sharpened distance, 940 meters, wind drift, 2.5 degrees left, 3 silhouettes arming grenades on the ridge. Her breathing slowed, not a tremor in her hands. She squeezed. The rifle thundered, a single, sharp crack that split the gorge like lightning. One figure dropped instantly. The medic was gone. The sniper was awake. She lay prone. Scope steady, the screams of the wounded fading into nothing but pulse and breath. Her second shot ripped through an RPG gunner, hurling him from his perch, from the drone feed. Corporal Mason Voss saw it all. His voice cracked over comms. Who just fired dust cloaked her uniform. Blood stained her sleeves. The only figure behind the Axe 50 was a combat medic no one trusted with a rifle. Who gave you permission to shoot, Voss? Whispered, though he already knew. Claire didn't answer. She adjusted her aim, exhaled, and fired again. A third target fell. By the time the echo faded, the battle's rhythm had changed. The SEALs below regrouped, voices rising with momentum. Claire kept her scope locked, ready for the next silhouette to break cover. And for the first time, it wasn't chaos that filled her veins, it was clarity. The remarkable part wasn't just the shots she landed, it was that Claire Rains was still wearing her medic's armband. When the enemy fire finally dulled, she slipped from her perch to tend a fallen Marine, wrapping a bandage tight, starting fluids, shielding him from shrapnel, and then climbed back behind the rifle without hesitation. One hand to heal, one hand to fight. Later, a veteran sniper would admit, I used to think medics had no place on the front line. That day, I saw how wrong I was. In the command center, Commander Jack Harlow watched every move through the live feed. He never told her to stop. He couldn't, because if he had, he would have had to climb that ridge himself, and deep down, he knew he couldn't match her composure. Claire never pulled the trigger for glory. Each shot was calculation part medicine, part instinct, part sheer refusal to let another heartbeat stop. And when dusk draped across Red Dagger Gorge, the convoy rolled out intact. Sweep teams confirmed no additional casualties, an outcome so rare it bordered on impossible. One officer murmured, I've never seen anything like it, a medic saving lives with both hands. When the gorge finally fell silent, Mason Voss climbed to her position. He found Claire sitting beside the Axe 50, her shoulders slack, her head resting against the rifle as though asleep. Not from exhaustion, but from peace. He lowered himself beside her. I thought you weren't allowed to touch it, he said. She gave the faintest smile, eyes fixed on the horizon. So did I. They descended together. Her teammates didn't greet her with shock, but with gratitude the silent kind only soldiers share when they know who carried them back alive. That night, under the lantern's glow, Claire opened her battered notebook and wrote, Today, I used everything I knew to keep others breathing, whether through a needle or a bullet. She didn't mention the rifle or the enemy, just the truth. By morning, the camp was alive with whispers. Yes, the convoy survived. But what stunned everyone was the identity of the shooter. A nurse, a medic, Lieutenant Claire Rains. Commander Harlow sat in the tactical tent, replaying the comms again and again. Voss's voice cut clear each time shooter is Medical 3. Harlow remembered his own warning. Delivered like a sentence, touch that rifle and you're done. And now, the same rifle had saved them all. The debrief that afternoon was crowded. Not for reports, but for answers. Claire sat in the back row, uniform stained with red dirt, sleeves rolled high, her wrists darkened by sun. Nothing about her looked different. But every eye that settled on her knew she was no longer just Doc. Rico, one of the unit's top snipers, scratched his head and broke the silence, half laughing, half serious. He said, "Doc, I thought you were doing medical. Didn't know you were up there wrestling with death itself." Laughter followed, not cruel, but the laughter of men alive when they shouldn't be. Then Mason Voss stood, his voice steady. "If it wasn't for her first shot, I wouldn't be here." The room stilled. Commander Harlow rose. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a heavy coin stamped with the image of a raven. "This was meant for a ceremony," he said. "But some people don't need fanfare to be recognized." He crossed the room, set the Raven 7 challenge coin on the table in front of Claire, and let it fall with a soft clink. No drums, no cameras, just a sound that carried more weight than any metal. From that day on, no one called her just a medic. They called her by her name, simple, quiet, irreversible. But Claire's test was not over. The real challenge waited ahead when her role as healer and marksman would collide again, and when her father's words would echo back with a meaning she had not yet faced. The first soldier who came to see Lieutenant Claire Rains after Red Dagger Gorge didn't bring a wound. He brought a question, not about medicine, but about aim, about breathing. Claire didn't lecture like an officer. She told stories the kind her father once told her about the difference between pulling the trigger to prove something and knowing when not to, every weekend as the desert sun slid behind the Nevada cliffs. Claire left the medical bay door open, not for air, not for light, but so everyone passing could see the glove hanging on the hook, a sniper's glove, pristine and unused. Beside her medic kit, pinned to it was a note, hopefully. "You won't need it next time." It wasn't decoration. It was recognition. Quiet proof that the medic no one trusted had become a pillar her team could not stand without. Months passed. Wounds healed. But the echo of Red Dagger Gorge lingered in every late-night retelling, when new recruits arrived. Her story wasn't told as legend, but as a reminder never judge a soldier by the patch they wear. One evening, under the desert moon, Claire opened her old wooden box. Inside lay her father's torn glove and the faded photograph beneath the oak tree. This time, she added the Raven 7 challenge coin, not to cling to the past, but to mark it complete the following week. A drill combined sniper overwatch with medical support for the first time. The unit asked Lieutenant Rains to instruct. No one objected, not because she was a hero, but because they trusted she knew best what was worth shooting and what was worth saving. At dusk, when a young soldier fumbled with his scope, Claire knelt beside him. She shifted his stance, nudged the barrel a fraction, and smiled warm enough to calm him, sharp enough to keep his focus. The shot struck dead center. He turned to thank her, but she only whispered. Almost to herself, the wind is never the problem. The problem is who's breathing beside you. That night, Claire wrote one final line in her notebook. Today, I don't hear the bullets anymore. I only hear my team breathing steady. The next morning, another sniper's glove appeared beside hers on the bay door. No note, no name, no one claimed it, but everyone understood. Respect doesn't always need words. Sometimes, it only needs action. And you? Soldier, where are you watching from? Drop your city below. And lock in with us? Subscribe so you never miss the next untold story.